right. Welcome back to another episode of Nursing Now. I'm your host, Janelle McSwiggan, and I'm really excited because I have Karen Doran on, and she is the Rest RN. So, Karen is a stress and well-being coach for nurses, and she focuses on improving stress and sleep for nurses. So, Karen, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit more about the stress RN? I love that name, by the way. As a writer, I always pick up on like nice sounding flows, like good alliterations, and I really like your name.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Um,
so the rest RN comes from this really foundational part of how I coach that rest is essential and rest is a productive activity. And it is the critical missing piece in most of our own wellness plans and our own health. And especially for nurses, we are in jobs that are really, really stressful. And we're not given the skills or taught how to deal with stress. It's a huge gap in our education. It's a huge gap in our training. And because we don't have that education, then what happens is we suffer a lot of health issues because of stress that's just rampant and we don't know how to shut it off. We suffer with a lot of sleep issues because of the stress of our jobs. And modern life itself is stressful too. So not only are we dealing with being nurses, we're also dealing with being people in modern life and dealing with all the other things that we have on our plate. And so for me, and that was a huge missing piece that I discovered after I burnt out for the first time in one of my first nursing jobs. And I didn't want to do that again. And so I was like, how do I do things differently? And discovered that a foundational piece of wellness is learning how to manage your stress and learning how to sleep well.
I definitely found it was a turning point for me when I discovered one, how much stress I was in. I don't think I realized like how much I was clenching my body, especially my teeth. Even as a kid, I would bite my lip a lot when I would get like excited or anything. And as an adult, that translated to when I was stressed, I would really clench down on my jaw to the point where I didn't even notice that I was doing it until I just focused on being more aware of my body in the moment. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I feel so tense in my entire body, like my shoulders, my neck, my jaw. So I feel like I struggled even like knowing that I was stressed. So I feel like recognition is such a big part of it because you do burn out when you're in that constant fight or flight. I definitely burnt out too. Like your foundation is sleep. So much healing happens in your sleep. So yeah, I'm so happy that you're supporting people in this way because I suffered from both of those issues and my life has changed so much for the better now that I've handled some of those things in my own way. So I'm sure that the nurses that you're taking care of really benefit from this.
Yeah, I like to say I'm a recovering chronic stressor and overachiever because I lived most of my adult life and even looking back as a teenager in this state of just constant doing and doing the next thing and achieving the next thing. And if I had any time, then it had to be filled with something. And that was a long years and years and years of that. And I was never taught how to actually recover and how to take care of myself and how to create space for my own wellness. And then I got to a point where my body was like, no, we can't do this anymore. We're not meant to live in this state of stress. We're designed to be able to meet stressors. I mean, we have the fight or flight response for a good reason. It's very effective, but we're
Yes.
supposed to recover from it. We're supposed to get
Mhm.
out of it and live most of our life in the rest and digest state. And when we live most of our life in the fight or flight state, it does a lot of damage, not just to our physical body, but also to our emotional state and our mental health. And we just never actually heal and recover.
Mhm.
And so now that I'm functioning differently, it's like night and day, and how I can navigate the stressors of life, but also recover from them. And I have so much more space in my day. But I also feel like I'm I am still as productive, if not more productive, because I'm focusing my energy on what's really important. And I've kind of cut out the stuff that are energy drains or not important to me or not necessary. And so I feel like I know that I'm actually able to accomplish what I want to accomplish without doing all the extra stuff that wasn't necessary.
You know, you make a good point. I definitely use like a lot of time blocking and lists to keep track of what I need to get done. And while definitely my stress has become a lot lower, I have become a lot more focused as a person. And I definitely feel like my, I guess, day to day hasn't suffered. So that's a good point there too. Can I ask, are you a firstborn child by chance?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, I am too.
Firstborn daughter. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk like how I feel. So yeah. Sorry for anyone listening that could hear my cackle right now. Yeah, I just like recognize another firstborn, like overachiever daughter when I see one. Yeah.
Right. I hear you. Yep.
You're a recovering
And
firstborn.
right. And
Yeah.
it's interesting though, that type of personality
Yes.
um, tends to find its way into healthcare and tends to find its way into nursing. And part of it, I think, is because of how the education is set up. You are really kind of forced to be really, really focused and really focus on achievements.
Yeah.
And that's also really rewarded, you know,
It
like
is.
you almost have to have perfection. You do have to have
Uh-huh.
perfection to even get into nursing school and to make it through.
Absolutely.
And so it really kind of sets up, well, I think it trains you or reinforces those patterns that got you there, but really
Yeah.
aren't that healthy. But
Yeah.
they serve you to get you through school, you know, or to allow you to manage kind of how a lot of nursing is set up.
Yeah.
But then our health suffers.
Yeah.
So
No, you
I'm,
burn out. Yeah.
yeah, you burn out. And also too, like you said, that you weren't even really aware how stressed you were.
Oh yeah.
Um, I didn't know either. Like that was just normal. That was just
Yeah,
you're a
as an
contributing member.
overachiever. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. You're
exactly. That was just
yeah.
my day to day. I grinded. That's what I did. I did one task and then another task. And it's like the dopamine hit of doing one thing after another. Like, this is what I've done all day. You know what I mean? But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, at the end of the day, though, it's hard to shut off that brain. It's hard to relax and settle back down to yourself. So I definitely found ways to create like a very large buffer. Like I'm a writer. And I noticed that like my writing brain is working at like such a high like velocity. I'm like just pulling words out of nowhere that I couldn't write. Like I think the buffer now is like 3 hours before bed. I cannot write because my brain is just like going. So I definitely had to like tweak my workflow to like support my sleep. But before I was like, why can't I sleep? I just like wrote like 1,000 words on diabetes right before bed. So yeah, that's really tough too, that overachieving and like working on top of that.
Yes. Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point too, that when we are used to being in that state of
Hmm.
activation, right?
Yeah,
Because we're so used to it. It's not if we're always even fight or flight, just like always activated on
yeah.
what's next? What are we doing next? How can I be productive? I have to be doing something.
Hmm.
When we shift out of that, it feels really uncomfortable because we're
Yeah.
not used to it. And so that's also part of what I work with clients is getting comfortable with authentic rest
Hmm.
and shifting our mindset that this actually is essential and it is doing something for us. It is
Absolutely.
productive, but not in the way we're used to. It's not checking off a to-do list. It is, you know, doing something positive for our bodies and our brains and our emotions, but it feels different and it can feel really uncomfortable. And there's also a lot, sometimes guilt that
Mm.
comes up with that. Like I should be doing something else,
Yeah.
or why have I just, you know, sat here and read this book for an hour? Dang
Yeah.
it, I should have done something else. And so there's a lot of shifting in mindset that has to happen because of that.
Yeah, I think and in this day and age, we definitely put a lot of value in what we've accomplished for like a set amount of time. So when we do take a break and sit back, it almost like devalues us to a certain viewpoint. So I can definitely understand that you work with mindset shifts like within your like coaching and your daily support that you offer people. I could see that being a very big part of the coaching that you offer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because our thoughts first, how we think about things and how we believe our beliefs directly impact our actions, and even our thoughts and emotions. So, if we believe that to be valuable, we have to be doing something or we have to be accomplishing something, then that belief is going to drive our behaviors. And we are going to feel really guilty and uncomfortable when we rest and take care of ourselves. And so we do have to examine those and get curious. And sometimes it's really uncomfortable to bring up some of those beliefs and realize like, oh wow, I do believe that it's not serving me anymore. I can shift it.
Yeah.
But just also you have to identify things to be able to change them. So that awareness is always the first step of any sort of habit change or transformation, is looking at with curiosity what the current situation is.
Well said. Very well said. So you support nurses in both sleep and stress. Is stress the primary source of most people's sleep? When you modify one, does it improve the other?
It's a really great question. I would say that stress is impacting people's sleep a lot more than they give credit for. Um,
Mhm.
I really do think that. And I see that. So to build a good sleep routine and healthy sleep, it takes a lot of habit shifts and prioritizing sleep and preparing for sleep and protecting sleep as well, protecting that time that you need to sleep or the quality of the sleep. What do you need to do to make that work for you? And so what happens is that because it is a habit change to create good sleep, the stress of the day and usually will kind of get in the way of those things you need to do.
Mhm.
Sleep seems to be the thing that is sacrificed first for productivity or for
Yes.
getting stuff done. And then also when we are in a stress state or an activated state and we don't stop that stress cycle every day or at the end of the day, then our brains are still going. Our body's not prepped for sleep. We
Mm.
can't sleep as well. It takes us a long time to fall asleep.
Mhm.
So, being able to identify our stress response and shift out of it intentionally will improve our sleep, hands down. And it's linked, right? Because you're stressed, so you don't sleep well because you can't fall asleep or your mind's going or your body's not relaxing. And
Mhm.
then you're sleep deprived.
Oh
And so
yeah.
then the next day, you're more stressed because when you're sleep deprived, your brain doesn't think well, your body feels horrible. Then often you drink a lot of caffeine to try to get you, you know, less fatigued. And then you don't sleep
Mm.
well because you drink a lot of caffeine and you're on edge and your cortisol levels high because you drink a lot of caffeine. It's just this
Yeah.
vicious cycle. So you really do need to address both. And really, if you just focused on improving your sleep, your stress levels would decrease too, because there's habits and there's shifts that happen. And in sleep, that's when you can recover and
Mhm.
repair. So you're going to wake up with more reserves for the day. So I think whichever one you start focusing on is going to overflow into the other one.
Interesting. Yeah, because a lot of good sleep hygiene is like relaxation right before bed. Like we don't want to be running marathons at like 8 p.m. We want to be like hanging out, reading like a mellow book, like focusing on like a simple task, that type of thing, which is also like super relaxing. So no, that does make sense. And that's why building those habits is so important. And it took me a really long time to realize that too. It was a lot of why can't I sleep? Why can't I sleep? I'm lying here like so frustrated, but it's one of the more difficult things to overcome when you can't sleep and you're stressed. It really does take time. Like it's taken me like years to get to the point where I am now. And definitely like a couple of months of like building a bedtime routine where my brain recognizes it as a bedtime routine and it says, okay, this is the first step of this like winding down period. So yeah, I think that rest and I think sleep and stress is definitely one of the more harder things to overcome.
Yes. And I think it also is so, but
It's
when you
okay.
focus on stress and sleep, it
Mhm.
makes the biggest impact.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's why I feel like if that's all you focused on, or just one or the other, that's going to overflow into so much else. And it is really hard. It seems very daunting to, decrease your stress,
Hmm.
improve your sleep.
Hmm.
Um, but it's almost like it's that small hinge that's going to swing the big door for your wellness. It really does help. And once you understand more about how your body is responding to stress, what that feels like, what
Hmm.
it's doing, becoming more aware, and then how to intentionally shift out of that stress. Um, I can teach people techniques to do it in just minutes. And so when you're able to do that, then that allows you to sleep better. And
Hmm.
when you're not sleeping well and you have more awareness about yourself, and you're able to identify, why am I not sleeping well? Is it right now? Is it because my mind is racing and I need to do some practices to help calm my brain down? Or am I hungry? Is my blood sugar not balanced? Sometimes we just are hungry. We need a little
Yeah.
snack. um, so there's when you build that awareness, the solutions are a lot simpler than we think. Is just really also building that awareness and that personalized toolkit. What works for me,
Mm.
and what are those go-to tools in my toolkit that I know that will work for me, and that's a lifelong skill to have.
So for most people listening understand what good sleep hygiene means. A dark room, no caffeine after a certain hour, however your body metabolizes that. No phones in bed. We know blue light is like really bad for like proper sleep hygiene. But what advice do you have for those night owls that struggle to sleep after their like shifts when they get out at like 11 p.m. or like that 7 to 7 p.m. shift? That's still kind of late after they get home and drive, but they want to maintain a pretty regular sleep cycle to the rest of the world. Do you have any advice for those people?
Yes, so I think that's why having a sleep coach as a nurse is really
Hmm.
valuable, because we have irregular work schedules and irregular, sleep schedules. And so, first, I think it's really important to prioritize and protect uh, the quality of your sleep, but also know that it might look different than everybody else,
Sure.
because the demands of our work are going to look different. And so, first thing that's really important is to understand your chronotype, meaning understand where your natural rhythms are. Are you naturally a night owl? Are you an early bird? Or are you someone that tends to be a little bit more flexible? Can you nap and feel better, or do you only nap when you're sick? Right? There's some people that can't
Yeah.
nap. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of these kind of tendencies that really are unique to each person. And so you need to have personalized solutions for your
Mm-hmm.
sleep based on you.
Mm-hmm.
Also based on, your support systems. Are you coming home and have small children running around the house, and then you're supposed to be sleeping for 8 hours in the middle of the day because you work night shift? Or do you come home and you have animals that all need to go outside and go for a long walk? And that wakes you up, but you really should be sleeping.
Yeah.
Kind of figuring out what your own personal barriers are to good sleep is really valuable. So figuring out your own personal barriers or frustrations or difficulties in getting good
Mm-hmm.
sleep and identifying those is going to be a really good first step, because we have to look at this from a personalized perspective, right? Generic sleep advice isn't going to generically work for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for nurses that are working long shifts and irregular shifts, the demands on our sleep and time are going to look differently. So it's really interesting to know that even if you work 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., that's considered shift work, even if you're working days, because
Yes.
it's a long shift and you're kind of starting work before most people do and you're ending work before most people do. You often work weekends and irregular shifts.
Mhm.
And when you think about it, you have a 12-hour shift, then you go home and you're back, less than 12 hours from when you ended work. So you also have a more narrower time to really get good sleep. Um, so even day shift people need to identify that sleep is going to be really important for them. And then if you're a night shift person, sleep is something that you're really going to have to prioritize and protect even more. And learning how your body reacts to a night shift, figuring out the best practices for you, and also being aware of your chronotype. There are some, natural rhythms in people that are better suited for night shift and some that are not. Um, and so it's interesting, like I feel like in healthcare, a lot of people are just wanting to get off night shift because they're
Mm.
like, oh, this is ruining my life. Night shift is ruining my
Mhm.
life. But if you aren't actually a night owl, it might actually be harder for you to work a day shift
Yeah.
because you're not awake and alert naturally at 7 a.m. and you're going to get way more fatigued. So there are some ways to optimize that, but it might look like maybe working 1 or 2 days in a row, taking a day off, and working another day. So kind of being empowered with your schedule too, to help if you have that ability at your workplace or advocating for that to help support your own health and your sleep is also really important. Sometimes we forget that we can do that. We can advocate for our own schedules, even if maybe on night shift, like if you are a morning person, your schedule is going to be a lot more rigid, your natural sleep cycles. And so working on night shift, you're going to get more fatigued quicker.
Mhm.
So doing, 3 or 4 days in a row at a night shift might actually be harder for you than doing 2 days and then taking some time off to recover and then starting again. So there's a lot of kind of things you can explore um, to optimize your sleep.
Yeah, that's a great point with the manipulation of the schedule. I wasn't quite sure what you meant at first, but that makes sense to have that rest period in between to kind of catch up and let your body heal from that. Uh, Interesting. It was such a good point that you said that there's less than 12 hours in between shifts, even like for day people. It was like, oh my gosh, you're right. I didn't even think of that. So you're really on the crunch there too. You have to be like really efficient with your time, asking for support. I'm sure for the people around you, for those barriers that you spoke about, I'm sure is really important too. You mentioned chronotypes. I'm sure that's something that you work through with your course. I did look into them. That was pretty cool too. That's something I had not heard of before. So it's so interesting how deep you can get into sleep and the science behind it. And we're like really just scratching the surface when we talk about sleep from like a layman's terms, like when we haven't like really like studied it. So again, like your services are so needed in that way because it is so individualized. Do you have any advice for people that are switching from day shift to night shift or night shift to day shift?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so, I mean, I think when you have a rotating schedule, it really bringing in as much support for you from your support network is going to be really important. Or even just if you're working day shift or night shift. I mean, when you're working shift work, your family is also kind of working shift work with you, right?
Yes.
And I think those are just really important conversations to have with those people close to you. Like, hey, this is how I need your support. My phone's going to be on silent from these days to these days, or these times to these times. Or having some sort of a shared family's calendar, even like I'm not working today, but I have to sleep, so I'm not available.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when you're shifting between nights and days, yeah, you really do have to prep for it.
Yeah.
That sleep wake schedule, consider it part of your job, right? Like it is part of your job is to also set aside that time or to plan for when you're going to need to be sleeping and when you're going to need to be waking. And there's not this idea that like you have to tough it out, right? Like you're just not tough enough for this schedule or this shift. That's really defeating, right? It's just that you haven't figured out what your needs are and what works best for you yet. But we really can thrive in lots of different types of schedules if we put the intention to it.
Mm-hmm. I think I hear the overarching theme that everyone's body is profoundly different. So, in the same way that medications, exercise, certain allergies are present in different people, certain sleep regimens might work for some people and not for others. So, really tuning into what might work for your body, a lot of trial and error, but not giving up along the way, and knowing that you don't have to suffer with poor sleep and that there are plenty of options out there. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Um, so we're gonna segue a little bit into like the business portion of this because the target audience is nurses who might be interested in leaving the bedside and are just kind of curious about starting their own business. So, how did you get started with your role as a health coach focusing on sleep and stress? What were your few steps with this? Did you take any certifications or classes? I've been talking to some health coaches, and it sounds like some health coaches might take a general health coach course and then choose to focus down. Can you just tell us a little bit more about how that came about for you?
Yes. So, um, like I'd mentioned earlier, I had burnt out pretty significantly in my first nursing job. And then I started a new position and it had a bunch of health issues because of chronic stress that I was never addressed. And so I was at this stage where it's like, I have to do something differently. I don't want to feel like this anymore.
Mhm.
This is not sustainable. And I
Yeah.
also don't want to sacrifice this career that I've worked so hard for. And I also feel that it's really not fair that either that you can't do this job and also be healthy. Like we should be able to do both. And so I
Yeah.
really started to look for some solutions. Like we got to figure out how to do this differently.
Hmm.
Um, and I realized there's a huge gap between knowledge and action for nurses. I mean, I could list 20 things that I'm supposed to be doing to take care of myself, and all nurses can, right? But it's
Yes.
the implementation. There's a huge gap there.
Uh,
Um, and we probably know more than anybody why we should take care of ourselves, right? We're dealing with people with diabetes and heart disease and
yeah.
all these preventative illnesses, and we see the worst of it. Yet we still are doing all the same things they're doing that got them there.
Yep.
So I was like, why is it so hard to take care of ourselves? What is going on? So um, I think the internet is probably listening all the time. I don't want to go off and onto a tangent, but ads started to pop up on my browser for health coaching. And I was like, what is this? I never heard of it before. Um, and so I didn't have a lot of experience in health coach, like what that was. I didn't know anybody who'd done it or knew it was really a possibility. So I did some research on some basic programs and enrolled in Health Coach Institute. And so I got certified as a health coach and then a life coach. So a generalized health and life coach certification. And I did some extra training with them in like more transformational work and belief and identity for people. And that program was really focused on habit change, the science of habit change. How do you help people actually bridge that gap between knowing what they should do and actually doing it? And so as I started to do general coaching and get experience with that, I found that there are certain sessions that I got really excited about. And it was the stress stuff, the stress teaching of like, what's going on in our body? How do we minimize stress? And that also opened my eyes to, hey, I think this might be really what I need.
Mm-hmm.
And then the more nurses I talked to, I was like, oh, yeah, this is a piece we're missing. And if I only taught this, we would be doing really well.
Oh, cool, cool.
That's where we need to focus. This is a huge gap. And so, and honestly, I feel like if I teach people how to manage their stress and improve their sleep, their nutrition will be more effective, their
Yep.
exercise routine will do better for their body. All these other things that you can get support in you'll have better results. But if you're still stressed and not sleeping well, all these other things you're invested in are not going to get the results you want, right? You'll still gain weight if you're stressed, even if you're eating perfect. So I was like, we gotta learn this stuff. So that's kind of how I ended up specializing more. It was really just from what I got really excited about and what I was passionate about and where I felt like my gifts and talents were and what voice I wanted to have in the conversation, because you can't speak to it all. You got to
Yeah.
find what excites you. And then from there, because that's what really interested me, then I went into there's the emotional side of stress management. Our emotions are part of our stress response.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think about that very often, but that's a really painful part. When we're really stressed and our emotions are all over the place, we're
Mm-hmm.
snapping at people, we're angry, we end up crying in the med room for no reason and can't stop. Like that emotional dysregulation is really uncomfortable and really concerning. And I realized that's a huge part of our stress response. So I got special training in emotional regulation techniques
Wow.
in relationship to our stress manage, like to stress and anxiety and those sort of things. So like, how do we regulate our emotions and build that emotional reserve? Which is really critical too for nurses because our job is so emotional, right? We are
Yes.
in the mess with people's emotions and our own, and we don't know how to recharge those. We just are depleting them. So I got some additional training to build that kind of component up to be able to serve people better. And then I also built up my understanding for sleep education for shift workers. So I did a specific program that just gave me more depth in that to be able to provide some more personalized solutions that way.
This is so cool. I had no idea that there were so many super specific programs out there to support people. Thank you so much for walking us through exactly how you built this super specific program and how evidence-based it really is. That was really cool to hear. Because I see so many amazing health coaches out there doing really unique things. And I always wonder how they get to their end place. So yeah, thank you so much. And I definitely agree with you about stress being like the overarching thing for so many things. I feel like we want to get rid of stress because stress is uncomfortable. We don't feel good when we're stressed, but what we don't really consider is that stress is like an underlying process that really affects like disease processes and how our body functions on such a deeper level. And when you can like alleviate that, it really does help overall. So kudos to you for really taking this on such a comprehensive level and for following your passion like that, and also for taking a burnout perspective and having a happy ending with that. I've had a lot of nurse entrepreneurs on here, and a lot of them have started with a burnout story. And they actually, that's how mine started too.
Yeah.
It's all started with burnout.
Yeah. I mean, I think that um, the gift in burnout is that it
Yeah.
causes you to pause and to
Oh, yeah.
reevaluate and to reorganize and say, what do I want to do differently? For my case, like I I'm still working at the hospital 12 to 24 hours a week. So I do a per diem shift over there because I still love it. And I can still love it because of the work I do, because I know how to manage my stress, and because I know how to kind of manage my energy levels and be able to say, what's my capacity this week for this and for that? And how do I manage that energy level in a way that prevents me from getting burnt out again? And so I also really like to work with nurses who might really want to stay at the bedside. They might really, they're looking for something different because they feel stuck, but they also don't want to give up patient
Mm-hmm.
care.
Yeah, I will say that most of the entrepreneurs I have on or that I have lined up, are still at the bedside in some capacity. I think the overall theme is that they felt stuck. And
Mhm.
opening their own business helped them feel less stuck and was like some sort of a creative outlet and an upward growth that they didn't quite have at their current job. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of nurses are still healers and we still want one foot in that bedside career, but we don't want both feet in a bedside career. So I think that owning your own business for a lot of the nurses that I've talked to has really allowed them to reduce their role in some way. And because that they reduce their role, they're a lot more appreciative of it instead of being like, this is the only thing I can do for the next 30 years. So here I am. So I think a lot of the time some people get hyper focused on the success of your business is if you leave the bedside. And I've had some pretty successful conversations with or some conversations with some pretty successful business owners that are still per diem just because they enjoy it. So that's interesting that I hear that from you too. So last question, what is your best advice for nurses listening out there that may want to do something similar, either become a health coach and maybe become a super focused health coach like you, but they're just not quite sure where to start. They're still at the bedside, they're listening to this, they might be burnt out. Any advice for those people?
Yes. So I honestly, because I'm a stress coach,
Hmm.
um, you need to make decisions like this from a place of rest.
Mm,
So if you are feeling stuck, if you're feeling burnt out, it's really important when you're exploring new options to do really focus on healing or decreasing your stress burden um, as you're making those decisions, because the risk is when we are stressed, our brains don't function as well. And they don't see as many creative solutions or as many creative
mm,
options. And they see a lot of black and white. And so often when we are trying to transition and we're really stressed out, we often just end up maybe running away and just going to something else because it's there and it's going to be better. Um, but we find that a lot of the same things are happening when we find this new thing. And the reality of stress and burnout and entrepreneurship is real. So I do also really want to say that, like, because I don't, when I'm doing work in my business, I don't clock in and out, right?
yeah.
I don't have parameters on my time. And you can do everything in your business. And there's always more to do.
Yeah.
So you really have to have those skills of being able to decrease your stress response, figuring out how to take care of yourself, figuring out how to manage your stress, so that that transition is going to be really empowered and
Hmm.
that you're going to be able to find the creative solution that is really going to fit you. Because often when we're stressed, we see an either or. Either I do this or I do that. When we are more rested, more less stressed, we will see both and, right? I could still work and I could start by maybe teaching an art class once a week because I love art, you know, and see how that goes. And then maybe I become an art coach or do art therapy for nurses, right? Um, but what's that first small step I can take to kind of explore this and see what I like? And then that will build energy for you too and decrease stress when you're following your passions and doing something that excites you. But it also kind of allows you to take that first step, build that, build that energy, and then be able to take the next step. So I really think that making sure that you are making decisions and focusing on your stress response throughout that whole process is really critical for making really good decisions.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. Thank you for explaining the science-backed reason for that. That you kind of get tunnel vision and you only think in black or white scenarios. And I definitely agree with starting small. I started very small with my writing stuff. I just started writing, like I started as a reptile writer and I was just writing random blogs, but they were very, very small, short blogs. And that's just because I liked lizards and I loved researching lizards. So find something that makes you happy, because I didn't know that that was going to lead me to where I was. I was just like, I'm bored and this seems fun. I'm bored and burnt out, so let's do this for a little bit. So
Yeah.
I definitely agree with like following that passion and just starting small and just like always thinking a couple of steps ahead. Like I just had the epiphany of like, oh, if I'm writing about this, why don't I use my nursing degree to write? So like I guess seeing like that opportunity, like you said, teaching an art class and thinking about doing art therapy. I think that's the entrepreneur mindset is always like finding that market and finding opportunity in that.
Yeah.
Um,
Follow
yeah,
the fun. Follow the fun. And
yes,
then
yes.
also having conversations with people that are in a spot that you might want to be someday. Just, like saying, hey, can I just chat with you about what your experience is?
Hmm.
How did you get here? What advice would you have? What are the challenges you have? How have you overcome them? Just having those conversations is really valuable because you might think that this type of work sounds really interesting. And then you talk to people who do it and you realize that's not really a fit for my personality. Um, and then you've kind of done some great exploration and learned more about yourself without kind of having to maybe taking a leap and starting school or shifting
Yeah.
something, really doing just having conversations. And I think more people are really willing to share, especially nurses are so generous. Like I think I've met so many amazing nurses that just love to talk about what they do and what that looks like.
Yeah, I think nurses are really willing to help the nursing community in particular, especially if you're trying to discover like a new niche. Nurses are really like willing to be like, "Oh, you're burnt out. Let me help you. I was burnt out too. This is what I do." Yeah, I've met amazing nurses too, especially if anyone's listening and you're not on LinkedIn. I definitely recommend hopping on LinkedIn. Amazing nursing community on there all the time. All right, Karen Doran, thank you so much for having me on. She is the rest RN. So we will have all that information right in the show notes. Thank you so much for being with me today. This was a really interesting talk. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right.